Hello and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The standard disclaimer applies. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions and comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable, on the Facebook event page for episode 215, Freemasonry, The Secret Tradition, or on the YouTube chat running along this side of this video if you're watching us live. As for introductions, you know me, John Ruark, past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957. Yet again, a full house tonight. First up for introductions, Robert Johnson.
Hello, Robert Johnson, Waukegan Lodge number 78, past master, current sitting secretary, host of Whence Came You? Thanks, John.
Thank you, Robert. Next up, we have Mike the intern.
Hello, Mike Hambrick here from Village Lodge number 274 in Burton, Ohio, and Triandria Lodge number 780 in Rock Creek, Ohio, where I'm the Lodge Education Officer and Junior Steward.
Always busy, always active. Keep doing it, Mike. Next up, the Juan Sepulveda.
Hello, everybody. Juan Sepulveda here from Orange Blossom Lodge number 80 in sunny Kissimmee, Florida, and the host of the Winding Stairs Freemasonry podcast.
Excellent, excellent. Worshipful Jason Richards.
Hey everybody, Jason Richards here, past master of Vacation Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, also a member of an academic lodge affiliated with GW, the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in Washington, D.C.
Great. And for our special guest tonight, we have brother Angel Millar. Angel, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and all that good stuff.
Hey, how are you doing? Well, originally I'm from England, but I've lived in the US for pretty much 20 years. I'm mostly known for the books I've written on Freemasonry, Freemasonry History, which came out in 2005, and then Freemasonry Foundation of the Western Esoteric Tradition, which came out in 2014, and then more recently, The Crescent and the Compass, which explores connections between Freemasonry and Islam from around 1850 to around 1930 or thereabouts.
Right, and I've only read one of those, so you have to forgive me for some of that. But yeah, you've definitely done your homework on the history of the fraternity, and that's why we're glad to have you on to talk about the secret tradition. So thank you for that. But first up, let's get to some Masonic news. First item on the docket tonight is a gentle reminder that Robert Johnson and I put together a helpful book for those who are aspiring to get their lodge in order. It's called It's Business Time, Adapting a Corporate Path for Freemasonry. For all of you junior lodge officers, as well as, even sitting worshipful masters trying to plan your year in the East. Hopefully this is a good resource that can help you think about the logistics of the operations and maintenance of your lodge. Because we have business meetings, let's make those more effective. So go on over to Amazon and check that out in either Kindle or paperback. Next up, we have an interesting article from Chris Hodap's blog talking about his friend and brother, the new Grand Master of Masons in New Jersey. And this gentleman here with Thor's hammer is what is his name here? Oh, Most Worshipful Roger B. Quintana. And he's got an interesting little resume for only being in the Grand East for a little over a month ago. I think it's fascinating some of the progressive things he's done in New Jersey already. A lot of these are worth a discussion on their own, but he's already accomplished the following. New Jersey can now open and do business on the EA and Fellowcraft degree. He's lowered the number to constitute a new lodge from 50 members to 25 members. allowed the ritual to be translated to other languages for approval, has allowed the Chamber of Reflection as a tool to lodges that want to use it, has re-recognized Cuba, has made Senator Robert Menendez a Mason on site, established a Grand Lodge level, on the Grand Lodge level, a Right Worshipful Grand Education Officer and a Right Worshipful District Education Officer that are separate from ritual. Hooray. And two other things. Established a Right Worshipful Grand Almoner and established 4 new affinity lodges. And that was just his first month.
I don't know if you guys saw a post I had earlier this week about this, where I was totally triggered. I can't believe he gave a Right Worshipful title to somebody who isn't teaching ritual. Just kidding.
He's
I think
still
it's
my
awesome.
beating heart. Yeah.
It's so awesome, actually. So, man, wow. I wonder if he's making friends.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think he's influencing people.
Oh,
Winning friends?
I think he is definitely appealing to a certain subset of the Masonic population, and I believe I personally am in that subset. So I think he's doing some really great stuff, and I'm excited to see what else he does.
Hey, sporting that mighty gavel, he's got my vote.
That's an early reference. That's early. That's early for this. For those who not seeing the picture, it is Thor's hammer with the square and compasses in it. I've been following this brother for many years. He's we've been in contact loosely through Facebook, but he is really in touch with the modern Masons, and he is listening. He's involved, and not just listening, but trying to make a difference. And actions speak louder than words. If you see what he's done already in such a little bit of time. But I'm interested to see how, what comes of it.
Pretty cool. Angel, he's kind of near you. What are your thoughts on some of the approaches he's been taking? He seems to be distracted at the moment. So it's really fascinating to see some of these things. Again, to your point, that's a lot of change all at once. Change is hard, and we'll see kind of what kind of blowback he gets. But for the most part, he's doing a lot of the same things we've been talking about for the past 3 years, for sure, 4 years. Next up, we wanted to remind everyone that this Saturday is something that we've been mentioning annually. It's the annual Celebrating the Craft telethon that will air live via the web from 6:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And for those who aren't familiar, think of it as the old Jerry Lewis telethon days with acts and skits and music and celebrities and discussions. So if you just go over to scottishrite.org at 6:30 Eastern Time on Saturday, May 19th, then a little video player will pop up and you can go and check it out.
Why did they cut it back to 5 hours this year?
I noticed that. That's interesting. It used to be a quite longer event.
Well, 1/6 longer.
Didn't it go till midnight before? I don't know.
Yeah, it was 6 till midnight.
Not only did it used to go till midnight, but I'm relatively certain at some point, I want to say the first year I watched it, I had to put in like a donation before you could stream it.
I do remember that. I think it was kind of like you either need to fill out the form or you need to. Yeah, they definitely presented you something ahead of time.
But I was in Washington, D.C. just last week, and we had lunch with Rich and Art and Dean, and they talked a little bit about Celebrate the Craft. And so you're going to have your host of the Tyler's Place podcast. He's going to be, I think he's co-hosting this year for Celebrate the Craft. So it's pretty cool.
Now the big thing is, and it's a pain point for me every year. They use some sort of old Flash player or something, and they don't make it easily castable to like a TV, Chromecast, and Apple Play, whatever.
So last year I was able to open it up using a separate browser on the iOS, and then I just pushed it to my Apple TV from there. But if you're not real savvy and you don't want to download like some sort of separate iOS for your iPad or whatever, it is kind of a bummer. I hope they just open it up. It'd be kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, because who wants to sit for 6 hours in front of their computer or looking at their phone, right? It needs to be castable.
Chromecast would be sweet.
Yeah, Chromecast would be awesome. Just like this show. Speaking of which, if you are unable to watch the Celebrating the Craft that evening on May 19th, and you happen to be in the Covington, Kentucky area, you too can swing on by and check out the 5 of us. The Masonic Roundtable will be over at the Scottish Rite Temple in Covington, Kentucky, Saturday, May 19th. That's this Saturday, right after the Scottish Rite reunion that they have. So come on by, check it out. We have an interesting, brand new panel discussion that we've all been doing some research for, and you will find it very edifying, very enlightening, and very interactive as well. So stay tuned for that. And again, it's special just for the guests of this event. So if you're anywhere near the Cincinnati or Covington, Kentucky area, it's worth make the trip. It's worth it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We're going to have a really good time.
Okay, and then last order of business, Jason.
All right, so last week, for those of you who actually stayed to the end of Final Thoughts, I put it out there that we were lucky enough to procure 2 copies of Angel Millar's book, The Crescent and the Compasses, which he graciously donated and signed over to us at Masonicon. So I said, hey, this next week, email us at the Masonic Roundtable at gmail.com, and we will put you into a drawing for those 2 copies. And the winners of those 2 copies, will send these out to you hopefully this week, are Gary Neal and William Batters. So thanks to everybody who responded, and I'm looking forward to getting Gary and William their books this week.
Great. Good stuff. That's exciting. So thank you for participating in that, which is a good transition into this week's topic, because those books are from who? From Angel Millar. So thank you for your contribution to that, Angel. Because we're going to talk tonight about the secret tradition in Freemasonry. So I'm just going to hand it off to you, Angel, and define, what do you mean by this secret tradition? What do you think Freemasonry is influenced by?
Okay, well, it's a slightly cheeky subject line, because I took it from A.E. Waite, who wrote a book of that title. But he was talking about various, let's say, esoteric interpretations of Freemasonry, especially as propounded through various rites and other pseudo-Masonic organizations.
Right. So then, what would you define to be this secret tradition?
Right. Well, so I think what Waite is referring to is a kind of mystical tradition that can be perceived to be within Freemasonry, or that sort of draws upon Freemasonry in different ways. Usually drawing on the ritual structure, but then, in a sense, using that structure as a kind of skeleton on which to then sort of flesh out other ideas. So it might be a Christian mysticism or Hermeticism, maybe ancient Egyptian mythology, or some other things.
So I know during my journey, I've come to piece together through all the different readings that I've come across, and I really truly believe that the system that we have in place today is a syncretic tradition that has kind of cherry picked the best pieces of these other mystery schools, of some of those that you mentioned, and tried to shape them into some sort of initiatic process.
Right.
Some of which are identical to those mystery schools, some of which are influenced by.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that statement or that conclusion?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, if you look at, the York Rite and the Scottish Rite and various other rites like the Knight Masons, yeah, definitely it is a whole mixture of different influences from, Christian chivalry to alchemy, Rosicrucianism, and Hermeticism, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so it is, and those degrees and those rites were floating around in various forms, from the 18th century onwards, and yeah, it is a collection of degrees that didn't disappear. Many of them did, but yeah, and in regards to being related to ancient mystery traditions, it's certainly true that Masonic scholars and the more mystically and esoterically inclined members of the fraternity have always sort of translated Freemasonry from the craft degrees all the way through the Scottish Rite degrees, translated those to see a kind of primordial tradition in a way, that maybe ancient Greek tradition or ancient Egyptian tradition and so on. So yeah.
Now, what would you tell those guys who see nothing esoteric? It's all exoteric Freemasonry. It's all green beans and ham dinners. It's just a group of guys hanging out, just like the Elks or the Rotary. What would your response to that?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't totally dismiss the exoteric side. I mean, I do think that it's actually important for Freemasonry, and I think it's important for people who are, let's say, spiritually inclined to be able to socialize and have a conversation about normal everyday subjects. And I think that that's actually an advantage that Freemasonry has, that unlike other organizations or movements that tend to be more explicitly esoteric, that it does mean that you have to be sort of functional to a certain extent, and I think that's a good thing. But yeah, I mean, when you look at the symbols of Freemasonry, it's difficult to see. It's difficult to see how people could not see something esoteric in it, or something spiritual or philosophical in it, really. And I don't really know much about the Elks, but the Rotary Club doesn't really have rituals, as far as I know. And there's hundreds of years of history of Freemasons perceiving in Freemasonry a representation of something like the ancient mysteries. So yeah, I don't quite know how people can't see something spiritual or philosophical in that, really. But I know that some people don't see that.
But Angel, I suspect that as the years go by and the organization continues to adapt to modern society and morph into what we see now, that there is more of, I mean, there seems to be less involvement in the esoteric component. With that in mind, how would you see the fraternity changing over the next decade or two?
Yeah, well, in my experience, the men that are joining the fraternity now are actually much more explicitly interested in the esoteric and in spirituality and mythology. And that's not to say that the Freemasons weren't in the past, because I think they actually were. When I first joined the fraternity, I gave a talk in my mother lodge on Freemasonry and various sort of spiritual traditions, without going into it. And they hadn't had a talk on Freemasonry in the lodge for about 4 years, and probably not for about 40 years before that. And guys that there seemed to be in every way just sort of ordinary and not really expressing any interest in it, came up to me after and told me, oh, that they've always had an interest in mythology, or they've always had an interest in, certain aspects of spirituality. But, I think 10, 20, 30 years ago, it was just not the done thing to say. And in a way, it was, it really was appealing to maybe not appealing, but really letting the lower common denominator set the tone of it, that it was all about socializing and drinking and eating and stuff. But if someone goes to a lodge for years on end, it's difficult for me to believe that they really have no interest in that. But I think it just wasn't the done thing to say it, really. Whereas I think that now there's absolutely no reason to join Freemasonry if you're not really interested in the philosophy or spirituality or self-improvement. It doesn't really make any sense. So
yeah, there's a definite value add to Freemasonry, which is the philosophical aspect of the fraternity and the symbolic interpretation that the ritual and degrees afford. I would tend to agree with that, even though I personally sought out Freemasonry for more of the fraternal aspect. I've shifted since then and gone more toward philosophy.
Good stuff.
It's interesting to see how over time, right, like the fraternity has existed for a number of years, but what we have, and like you really look at societal changes, and we have this huge influx of membership and all that 40, 50 years ago. And it just seems like you talked about, the social aspect, the drinking, the hanging out and all that. It like aligned. Like at that time, Masonry provided this outlet for something that was, in vogue in the United States, supper clubs and dining and all that stuff, right? And so now this is not, that's not in anymore. And so we have a fraternity that was kind of like exploded, and that was the main the main chunk of what we did. And so now we built on that, and that's not necessarily the linear line of society. Like we need to figure out where we match in that again. And I think how you're talking about this added spirituality, we've had over the last probably 10 to 15 years of Pew research that shows the declinism of strict adherence to religious rites and a more broader sense of spiritual understanding for most folks. And we talk about this idea of kind of blending the best things in Freemasonry. And what's interesting about that is we're able to pick and choose things in the fraternity, just like in real life. Outside the lodge, we're able to kind of, especially for somebody who would study comparative religions, you look and you can see like universal truths across all of them, and maybe how that comes into the lodge is a little bit, there's that element that's kind of the same also. Just some thoughts.
Yeah. Well, yes. A couple of things. I think the Freemasonry maybe in a way has sort of answered problems that have existed in society. So maybe after the war, when men wanted to have the sort of close male bonding relationships, but they couldn't find that in society. They turned to Masonic lodges and maybe other organizations as well. So you get that influx, and with Prince Hall Masonry, there was an enormous push to sort of present African American culture and African American people as being noble and of having value at a time when their value had been stripped away from them by society. So I think the Freemasonry sort of answers the problems of society at different times in different ways. But and today it is certainly true that religion is perhaps especially Christianity is in some trouble, or at least in decline. But at the same time, as you say, there is this sort of rise of spirituality, and not just these sort of alternative spiritual worlds, but also, even in sort of in the business world where it seems strange to think of it, but there's a big emphasis on self-development and positive thinking, and even some kind of spiritual attitude as well. So it seems to be everywhere. And but maybe at the same time, because it is everywhere, it can be a little bit trivial sometimes, and there's not always a link to tradition. It just becomes a sort of pick and mix spirituality, whereas Freemasonry seems to have a link to a tradition going back several hundreds of years, if not more. So
yeah, and that's what I really like about one of the earliest descriptions of Freemasonry as a system of morality.
Yeah, right.
Illustrated by symbols, that it's even though it is syncretic, that we've kind of established that it is designed to have a specific set of results through the initiatic process, and that it is in such a sequential order of the morals and lessons that you're taught that it fills a gap for, like you said, this younger generation that's more esoterically inclined, more spiritually inclined, more philosophically inclined, and it's there for those who want to look for that. So I think that's what I find really appealing about it. It is, and I think really, in my opinion, we don't focus enough on that it is a system, right? The system itself, because I'm a systems engineer, and I like to see how pieces fit together. I like to see how the gestalt of all the pieces satisfy the whole, and that's what our fraternity does by its series of rituals, history, the lessons that it's taught, the method of both getting into a lodge and as well as going through the experience with a mentor, right? All of that is on purpose and built in there by design. And when you design something, you're focused on the end user result. And so having that as a system, it's wholly unique, right? You really can't, as we said, you can't find that in Elks, Rotary, and anything else. And that it has a specific outcome at the end of this process. So I think that's what's really fascinating, because it's been influenced by these other traditions, or the secret tradition as a whole. That it has a certain element that you can't find in many other places.
Yeah, that's right, indeed. I mean, I would say I'm probably a little more nervous about systems than you are, in that, I tend to want to emphasize maybe the personal search, and I feel that sometimes the systems have a problem in that they become cliches. But
well, no, I totally agree with you, right? Same thing with processes, right?
Yeah.
Everything's a process. The way you brush your teeth, the way you go to work, that's all a process. In fact, I wrote more about it in that book we just talked about earlier. But that's the case, is we get so wrapped up in the cliches of systems and processes and really don't really think that everything we do is a system. It's all basically the definition of a system is a set of pieces as a whole that provide some sort of output. Basic, systems engineering 101. So that's what it is. And so we can apply all sorts of other baggage on top of that, but really at the end of the day, one of the first things I was taught when I went through the Blue Lodge was the Blue Lodge is here to make Master Masons. That's its sole purpose. And I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but it gave me pause to think about, okay, so that is the output, the things that come out the other end of the factory is
right.
It's interesting you say that, John. Like the Blue Lodge is here to make Masons, and when I used to hear that, I would become somewhat enraged. I would be just deep down, reflux would start building up in my stomach, and just like I don't know if you guys ever watched the cartoon Ripping Friends, where the guys, like, the necks would be all huge and all these veins, like, and then I kind of accepted this fact that wolves need to eat. So, yeah, maybe.
All right, Jason, what are your thoughts on this secret tradition?
So there's interesting There's an interesting comment in the chat room. It says there seems to be a general distaste for conventional religion. Yet we see that many young people do subscribe to various superstitious beliefs. I wanted to address that directly because I don't see a general distaste for conventional religion. I instead see a distaste in religious fueled hypocrisy, non-inclusiveness, overly dogmatic practices, and that come with.
Can you be too religious for Freemasonry?
Can you be too religious for Freemasonry? I think when your religious beliefs come at the cost of the ecumenical nature or the nature of toleration inherent within Freemasonry as we know it today, then I think you are too religious for Freemasonry. Case in point, there's someone I know who was interested in joining a lodge, and this person was just very, very into his religion, and that's all he talked about, and it was a huge piece of his life, and that's awesome. But I had a talk with him. I said, look, you kind of leave that part of you outside of the doors of the lodge room, because we're really an ecumenical society and fraternity. And I don't think that really sat well with him, because it was such a huge part of what he is. And, there's nothing wrong with that. But in the case of someone who can't be tolerant of others with different viewpoints and different religious beliefs, then I think Freemasonry really isn't an organization for that kind of person and shouldn't be.
Do you agree with that, Angel?
Yeah, well, in regard to there being a distaste for religion in general, I think it depends, right? Because probably Islam is growing to a certain extent, or has an appeal to a certain section of society, and probably other religions do as well, including maybe evangelical Christianity. But obviously there are certain sections of society, and maybe it's a growing section of society that rejects religion and prefers to see themselves as quote unquote spiritual but not religious. But in regard to being possibly too religious for a Freemasonry, I suppose it depends on the interpretation of the religion, and I think it's more to do with religious literalism than religion per se, because what if you're a Buddhist who says we're all one, and this sort of thing? It shouldn't really be a problem. But it depends on how you interpret that religion, and I think if it sounds like to me the example of the brother who was sort of religiously fanatical. Maybe the issue is not so much the religion, but maybe there's some other imbalance in his personal life that's led him to be a bit fanatical about his religion. But perhaps it could be equally something else with someone else.
Now, speaking of religion and Freemasonry, I did want to transition into another book that you wrote, The Crescent and the Compass. Which
that's the old version, but yeah,
the old version, cool new version.
Yeah, the new one's better, but
of course. So, so I'll have to get that one as well. But in that, you talk a lot about and you do a really good job of showing the transition of Islamic Sufism and how it inspired those traveling mystics in the in the early days. Do you want to kind of go into some of your findings there in your research, and how you think Freemasonry was overlapping with, influenced by Sufism as well?
Yeah, well, I should say up front. So there is a theory that you hear sometimes that the Knights Templar were influenced by the Sufis, and then the Knights Templar became the Freemasons, so that the Freemasons are actually based on Sufism. And personally, I think that's all total nonsense, to be honest with you. And I have to say the Knights Templar don't really interest me very much at all. But I think if you look at let's say the Masonic ritual over the last several hundred years, it changes very, very dramatically from the 1600s to the 1700s. So of what relevance that would be, even if it could be proven, I'm very skeptical. But Islamic mysticism to a certain degree had an influence on Freemasonry from around the end of the 19th century and a little bit on. And more importantly, perhaps, there are these sort of strange and curious crossovers where you find, say, Jamaluddin al-Afghani, who is sometimes considered to be the father of pan-Islamic thought, which in itself is a sort of forerunner of Islamism as a political ideology. He was a Freemason and pretty active in Freemason in Cairo when he lived there during the 1860s. And there are other figures like that in Great Britain. One of the first converts to Islam, Sheikh Abdullah Quilliam, who was originally William Quilliam. He was a very active Freemason. He was also very active in promoting the say political rights of Muslims under the British Empire. Set up his own Islamic center. This is late 1800s. So it would have been extraordinary at that time. There were hardly any Muslims in Great Britain at all. But he was highly politically active in the pursuit of promoting Muslim rights under the British Empire and in portraying Islam in a more favorable light. But at the same time, he was involved in Freemasonry and also in fringe Masonry, or what AEW might have called the secret tradition. So he was involved, for example, in the Swedenborgian rite of Freemasonry. And he also founded his own order called the Ancient Order of Zuzimites, which was closely based on Freemasonry. But he changed the mythology and based his mythology on that of ancient Egypt with Isis and Osiris and this kind of thing. Although he's sort of secularized it so that it wasn't Osiris the god, but it was Captain Osiris, and Isis wasn't a goddess, but she was the Virgin Truth and this kind of thing. So it's a very curious and strange organization that he founded. But yeah, you do find these links between Islam and Freemasonry, or to put it another way, especially with the more let's say more radically spiritual members of Freemasonry and the more radical thinkers within Islam from around the middle of the 1800s.
So Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. And so I'm going to ask you, can you give us a simple overview? I know it's very complex and nuanced. Can you give us a simple overview of what Sufism as a subset of Islamic thought entails?
Right. So Sufism. So so that's not necessarily connected to Freemasonry, although it shows up here and there. But so Sufism is basically a spiritual translation of Islam. It has a sort of mystical, sort of Gnostic elements, prayer, sort of maybe some element of sort of trance, but focusing on the divine and seeing the divine in the world, I would say. I think that would be a simple explanation. So you might compare it to something like tantric Hinduism. I'm not saying that they're doing the same things. They're clearly not. But it's that idea that you take the religion and interpret it in this sort of extra spiritual way.
All right. Juan, do you have another thought or question for Angel regarding the sacred tradition? I'll give you a second to mute that mic. Okay. And Mike the intern, I know you've been busy monitoring the chat room. How about you? Do you want to have anything to add?
I really have been just trying to monitor that chat room, so I've lost a lot of the conversation. But I have enjoyed listening to Angel speak because I've listened to him before. So, but in any case, thank you for coming on, Angel. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Jason, anything else on social media? Oh, Jason just stepped away. He's available at the moment. But you did say you were working on a new book too in the green room. Anything you want to talk about that? What research you're doing and the like?
I'm keeping that slightly under wraps, but
Okay.
Freemasonry is only a part of it, but it's a substantial part of it. But yeah, it's sort of I would just say that it looks at symbolism and rituals and practices of various esoteric and metaphysical traditions throughout the ages, but it's a little less historical than what I've done before and a little more philosophical.
Mhm.
But if you want me to fill in while people get their mics back in regard to Sufism, so Sufism has a couple of curious links to Freemasonry in a roundabout way. And one is that the Shriners early on claimed, or at least some of their early histories claim, that the shrine is actually a translation of Sufism into Western norms. So in theory, it's a kind of Western Sufism. And some histories claim specifically that it's from the Bektashi sect of Sufism. And there are these sort of curious connections. Another one would be Aleister Crowley, probably one of the more notorious occultists of 20th century and a bit before that. But Crowley was an irregular Freemason and also a head of the OTO for a while, which again takes Masonic rituals and maybe translates them in a more occult manner. And Crowley wrote a very peculiar book called The Scented Garden of Abdullah, and in there he says that he can't tell the secrets of Sufism in this book, if only because he is a Freemason. So he seems to suggest that there's a strong link between the two, or perhaps that they are the Eastern and Western versions of the same thing. So you do have this sort of curious turning up of Sufism in relation to Freemasonry from time to time.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, and some people have claimed that the Freemasonry is directly related or comes from Sufism, but I don't think that's true. And it tends to be people who don't really know about the history of Freemasonry that make that claim. But it has been claimed.
Yeah, I know. When you look at other authors such as Kirk McNulty, he concludes that, or he posits that the Freemasonry was inspired by the Enlightenment period, and as an output of the Enlightenment period was Hermetic Kabbalistic tradition, and that has then transformed into the Freemasonry that we know today.
Right.
He has a compelling argument about some of the ideas and philosophies that were talked about at that time as well. But again, a lot of it is still speculation. You can really only look at it through the lens of trying to put the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah.
Having all the puzzle pieces in the box. So this is a great episode. I know, Jason, there was one or two comments that I wanted you to pick up, and we'll talk about those.
Yeah, so we've got brother David Sutherland, who's listening in from Canada, mentions that he was asked to present a piece on of Masonic education in the lodge, and he found a few articles that he was very interested in reading, touching on mysticism and spirituality. But he ran it by the master of the lodge, and he suggested that this brother actually pick something a bit simpler to follow. And the master was worried about losing the attention of the majority of the brethren, but the brother who is to present the Masonic education really felt like they were missing out on a major aspect of the fraternity.
They are. Like, I can't tell you how many times have we talked about some of the things that we do, and what do we say? If it changes or gives one person any kind of value, it's worth it, right? And I've been to lodges. Okay, great friend of mine, Jim Fry, super smart guy, came out, did a piece on the golden verses of Pythagoras. Midway through, 5 or 6 dudes literally just got up and walked out. There were dudes snoring in their chairs. But like the 5 of us who were awake, it was amazing. And it was great. And the thing is, I have something really against the dumbing down of the fraternity.
You're here.
You know,
Well, here's a question for you, Robert. I while I agree with the sentiment that I have something against the dumbing down of the fraternity, I think it's more so the dumbing down of esoteric wisdom and esoteric philosophy that gets me, because the sheer fact that it's esoteric means it's really only accessible to a small subset of the population. So
maybe so, but I guess my point is, what I don't like is we have this erroneous focus on something like ritual. Nothing against the ritual guys out there, but the thing is the reason why people get attached to it is because, okay, they like theater, or they like this, or they like that, they like the tradition. But the reason why it's so huge is because it's tangible and it's easy. It's the easiest thing to do. The harder thing to do is to think. And if we're not going to like say, oh, okay, yeah, think, and then we've taken all the value out of thinking. That's why I was joking about making an education guy right worshipful. That's crazy. That's crazy talk. Make an education guy right worshipful. You're putting a lot of influence, a lot of weight behind education. You're asking people to think. This is unheard of in the last, however many years. And so, what? I think, if your master says he wants you to pick something like lower, in cognitive function, then whatever, that sucks.
Well, I want to, present a different point of view. There are very, very challenging topics in higher education. You can think about astrophysics, and you can think about, quantum physics, and like very complex subject matter. The faculty is not compelled, and the scientific community is not compelled to dumb down what defines those topics. They are perhaps compelled to present a stronger case for their discoveries, and whomever is presenting this to an entry, a new student, it is their job to present it in a way that is enticing, that perhaps is entertaining, that these people who are not, whose mental muscle is not as well developed, they can latch onto something and at least follow through. So for us brothers who give presentations and speak in public, it is important for us to consider not only the subject matter but the audience. And many times the challenge that we are faced is not to just present a high level topic and whomever can benefit from it, good luck. But the challenge there for us is to become even better presenters and find ways in which we can convey the lessons that we have learned in a way that those who are not as philosophically inclined can grasp onto, and perhaps, work on getting a higher tolerance or, easier way to understand these topics.
I totally agree with that. I think that's okay. Like, if you're going to take a complex subject, like I'll talk about quantum physics in some of my lectures, but I let everybody know, like, I'm not a quantum physicist. I understand this stuff a lot better than most, but I really break that down because I want to show you how it's interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess I should say, like, there's a difference between just opening up Morals and Dogma and reading pages out of that, and like reading a passage and then saying, can we talk about what this means?
Yeah.
Because the idea of thinking and dismantling it mentally, I think, is where the value is. It's not like, I don't consider you some smart dude because you use $10 words. I consider people smart because we can break down things. And if you can break something down for me, that's cool too.
And for us who are parents and how many difficult topics are we going to discuss with our children? And we don't treat them as idiots, and we don't lie to them or change the information. We try to find a way to capture their attention and then deliver it in an appropriate way. And I see it as a challenge for us. I mean, that's pretty much what we're doing here. We're talking about some stuff that other people have been in the fraternity for decades and they haven't cared. I pass. And if they go to a lecture, they perhaps doze off. But ideally, we're working hard to try to present these topics in a way that is palatable to a wide audience. And if they want something meatier with more substance or a deeper dive into the topics, well, they can go to a more individualized discussion with a brother who is well versed in the matter.
Sounds like we hit our nerve here on the last question of the night. So given the time, it's about time we start wrapping things up. Again, I want to thank you, Angel, for coming on. And I'm going to give you the first dibs for kind of your final thoughts, shameless plugs, anything else you want to add to close out the night.
Well, final thoughts in regard to the last subject. I have to say I agree with Juan. Often the problem is not. It's not entirely the audience. I mean, maybe the audience is not attuned to deep spiritual discussions, but it's really up to the speaker to be able to connect with the audience and put it in a way that makes sense to them. So I think that's actually what has to happen. But in regard to shameless plugs, people can visit my website if they want to find out more about me and my books. It's just my name, angelmillar.com, and that should be enough.
2 L's, 1 R, correct?
So Millar is Millar.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Angel. Robert Johnson, shameless plugs and final thoughts.
Well, it's awesome to have Angel on the show. I first got to hear you talk literally for the first time when we had the Boston Masonic Con out at Attleboro, Massachusetts, which was such a delight. And having you at our 300 event in DC, holy cow, so amazing. And it's just been wonderful to have you on the program finally and get to bend your ear a little bit and hear just some of your candid thoughts on some of these topics. So much of what we talk about in the fraternity is grabbing other people's perspectives. And certainly somebody who's got a world of experience, you're an international traveler, and you've seen a lot of things and you study a lot of amazing topics and things that you don't normally put together, like Sufism and Masonry, or looking at Islam and Freemasonry. And I just think that's so important. So I just want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing some of your insights with us.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. That's all I got.
Okay.
Thank you. Mike the intern.
So obviously I wasn't paying close attention tonight, but honestly, though, the first time I heard Angel speak was he was talking about his book, The Crescent and Compass, and it drew the conversation that he was having. I don't remember what podcast it was on, but I remember it drew me right in. I was actually hooked. That was, it really was. It was awesome to hear, and then awesome to actually get to meet you at the 300 this year. Or actually last year. So, and glad to have you on the show. Actually, from what I did hear, I enjoyed hearing you tonight. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Juan.
Brother Angel, I'll have to echo RJ. Thank you so much for joining us in DC last summer. It was great having you there and seeing the reaction from the attending brothers upon your presentation. So I greatly thank you for spending the time with us then and tonight.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I had a great time in the 300 events and tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, so it is good to to talk about what we discussed tonight, there's a few things that are part of the fraternity that for some people are important, and for other people they might not pay as much attention to them in their Masonic journey. So ideally, some of the brothers out there heard some of the things that you said and resonated with them, in order for them to look a little bit deeper about this secret tradition and make it a part of their Masonic education. So for the brothers listening and watching, thank you so much for making the Masonic Roundtable a part of your Masonic journey. And thank you for the brothers who have gone to freemasonry.com and supported my labor there. And there's a few brothers that we'll see in Kentucky. We're looking forward to this weekend. I think it's going to be very exciting. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'll see you brothers there. Good night.
Good stuff. Jason Richards.
All right. Excuse me. Really great episode. Angel, you're just a font of knowledge. So thank you so much for coming on and spending time with us tonight. Love talking about all things Masonry, and just there's so much stuff that we can talk about, especially when it comes to esoterics and philosophy as they relate to the fraternity, and as the fraternity is inspired by them and uses them to inspire countless brethren. So really, really cool show, good topic. And looking forward to seeing everybody in Kentucky this weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun, and just looking forward to hanging out with everybody. So we'll be back next week. Thanks so much for watching, and we appreciate all of the interaction tonight as well.
Great. So taking it home. Again, I've been very fascinated with the breadth and depth of your knowledge. It was great to just kind of talk off the cuff and have a very conversational discussion with you, Angel, because we could wind you up and let you go down a rabbit hole of all sorts of and all that. But it was good to keep it kind of high level and to share your experiences and your knowledge and your insights.
Thank you.
How this secret tradition has come to fruition today. So I've said my piece earlier in the conversation that I definitely think that this is a syncretic tradition that we have, and that really we have to be careful about pearls before swine, that we are making sure those who have the ears to hear it and can see what's there in front of them. But as Juan mentioned earlier, we're not going to satisfy everybody, nor should we try. Right. One thing that comes to mind is I did do a presentation on the philosophical elements of the circumpunct, one of my favorite presentations. And I did that up in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago and totally bombed it because no one had got any of the references. In fact, they don't have the circumpunct in some of their degree work. And so not only was it a symbol they were not familiar with, then therefore the philosophy and symbolism behind it meant nothing to them. And although everything was accurate in my jurisdiction, just completely, there's only 2 or 3 people in the room that picked up on it. And so, it was really fascinating to see that, there's a lot of hard work and research put into this, and it fell like almost in complete deaf ears. So it was a learning experience that, to Juan's point, didn't take into account the audience's viewpoint. Putting this together, still my favorite presentation. And for those who have the Preston Webb ritual that we have, that's the moderns, not the ancients, then or the other way around, that you'll get the references, and still one of my favorite tile presentations to do. But it's certainly an interesting system of morality that we have, and I'm thankful for it. So with that, thank you all very much for watching. We'll see you if you're in the Cincinnati area this weekend. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Thanks very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.